Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph and I lead the DevRel team here at AppSmith, and today marks a full year since I started the Friday Tech Workshop series. It has been quite a journey. I've learned a ton, and hopefully you have too. I really appreciate all of the support from the community. It's just been amazing seeing all of the likes and the subscribers and comments. So thank you again, everyone, for all of the support this year. And please stick around till the end because we have an important announcement regarding the Friday Tech Workshop series. All right, let's get started by checking out the first app in our top 5 from 2024. All right, first up, we've got this leaflet map generator. Now, these are in no particular order. It was hard enough to pick 5, and I'm not trying to rank them. These are just the 5 coolest ones from the year, the ones with the most views and likes, and just some of the stuff I had fun building. So this one is using leaflet.js, and they have this map type called simple CRS, coordinate reference system, I believe. And it takes a background image and lets you plot points on that image. So as you can see, I'm using like a game map here, but this could easily be, say, a floor plan for a building or a seating chart on, say, an airline or a movie theater or whatever it is where you want to have a background image and then plot individual points here and be able to interact with them. So I'm able to click to add a new point, and you can see it's saving the latitude and longitude of that point. I can also drag to move one of these, and then you'll see the number update here as I move the point around. And you can click to open up a menu here. So from here, you could do whatever you want and pass the ID or the latitude and longitude of that particular point and just pass that back to the rest of the app to do something with it. So this, like I said, it's kind of a fun game approach for the demo, but plenty of good business use cases for it as well. So let's check out how this works in the editor. All right, so the first thing you'll notice is I've got the custom widget here and a table that is displaying data from the custom widget model. So this data that we're looking at for the individual data points here, that's being exported from the custom widget, saved back to the custom model here, and then you can see those array values that are saved back here. And there are no queries and no JS modules in this app. Everything is done in the custom widget. So let's check out the code for that then. We'll select the widget here. And you can see that I'm preloading it with a URL here. I'm sending in the URL of the map that I want to use as the background. And then there's just this placeholder of an array. And that's where I'm saving all these points. And then if we go to edit the source, that's where the majority of the code is inside the custom widget. So we'll start with the HTML first. This is really simple. There's really nothing to it other than this div with the ID of map, and then the script for leaflet and some CSS. So both of these values here are just imported using CDN, and then I've got a div with the ID of map, and everything else is here in the JavaScript file. And if you collapse this AppSmith onReady, you can see that all of the code here is inside that onReady function. So when the map first loads, I extract that URL. There's also a URL for the individual marker, and I'm just using the AppSmith logo here, but you could pass in any image, and that could even be different for each point if you wanted different types. So then I'm just setting the bounds, creating that layer, and once that's all defined, then there's just functions for what happens when you drag a point. And I'm using the drag end on drag end so that as you're moving a point, it won't actually fire and change anything until you let go. And then that's when the model gets updated with that new point. And then I've got a function here for when a point is clicked so that I can pull up that little dialog and a button and an action, and I'm passing in the ID, and then from there you can connect that to an API or database and do whatever you want with it. So pretty simple to set up. There's just a little bit to learn about the library itself, but as far as an AppSmith, it's pretty straightforward. Just defining a couple different functions and when they get triggered, and then saving that data back to the model here as a new array. So every time one of those markers gets added or updated, I'm just going through the array of them and saving it back to the custom model. So that's leaflet.js. This one was really fun to figure out, and I think there's plenty of good business use cases, like I said, but really the first thing that came to mind was just making this kind of game map to see if I could do it. And if you wanted to, you could do all kinds of other stuff with this, with building maps and seating charts or whatever. So that's number one. Again, these are in no particular order, just my top five and some of the highest views and subscriptions from the community. So, all right, let's check out the next one now. All right, next up, we've got JSPDF with auto table. So I've done several videos on JSPDF and walked through the basics of how to use a library and merge in data to create a new PDF. But then recently, Paul in the community on Discord was asking about how to use auto table, and there's just a small trick to it. It doesn't quite work the same way as you'll see in their docs once you've imported the library. And so I just wanted to do a quick review on that and show how we got this set up. But before that, let's just check out the rest of the features here. So you can see I'm passing in an object for the customer, and that has multiple data points that gets displayed here. And then for this array of items, that is part of the same row, same record. And so just selecting a row here queues up that data and turns it into a PDF with the customer info here, the list of items in a table, and then a total. And you can also add a custom note. So if I wanted to put something extra in the PDF, you can do that right here. And then it's also merging in the person's name and preparing this so that you could send it as an email. Now, for this demo, I haven't actually connected an email tool. This one is more about the PDF part, but we've got demos out there on how to send an email. That's pretty easy with a SMTP connector or, say, Twilio SendGrid's API. We have a native connection for that. So on to the PDF part itself. Let's look at the code in the editor. And so for this one, I don't have any queries. I'm just using some mock data. So if we look on the JS side, I have this sample data, which is an array of orders. And so that's just the mock data that I'm displaying in the table. So all of the functionality is in this PDF utils. Now I've got this function that builds a PDF, and the first thing is you have to have JSPDF and auto table imported. So if you look on the libraries here, you'll see the little cube on the left side, and I have imported JSPDF and then the auto table plugin. And JSPDF is listed right here in the suggested libraries. So if you just click to add a library, bring up that menu with the plus, it's going to be right here, one click to download it. And then auto table, that one's not in the list, but you can get the link from JS Deliver or from any other content delivery network. So you just paste in that URL here. You can use the min.js or an ESM library and import that, and then you'll be able to use it in the editor, and you'll see the name of how it's going to appear in the editor if you expand here. So back here to the function now. First thing is just declaring a new instance of JSPDF. So doc equals, and then this creates a blank PDF that we can then manipulate using that doc, that variable that we've defined. So here we're just setting some text, and the numbers are going to be the X and Y position. You'll see a lot of these repeating here. That's the left margin, so it's always the same. And then here we're incrementing by 10. So there's a line of text here on the Y of 15 and then Y of 25. And so we're just incrementing that. So that's the top section. And then I've defined that as its own function here so that I can just kind of clean this up and say, add a header, do a table of this data, and then add a footer. And so I've got separate functions for the header and footer. And then the table itself, for that, you have to have the auto table plugin installed and JSPDF. And then once auto table is there, the doc that you've created, whatever you call that variable, it will have this auto table method added to it now that you've imported the library. And so that method takes in a 2D array. The first row here is an array of the headers inside another array. And then the rest of this is that 2D array of all the additional rows. However many rows you have, I'm telling it to start at 50 just so it's below all of this stuff for the header. And then final Y, that auto table will return a value telling you where the table finished. So I can use that to put a footer at the bottom. And lastly, I'm just outputting it as a data URL string. This is a built-in feature of the auto table, or sorry, of the JSPDF library. And so doc is that variable we named, which is an instance of JSPDF, which has a output method that can output a data URL, which can be displayed right here in the doc viewer, this document viewer widget. So if we look here at the output of that function, it's outputting this data URL with the file type and then a base64 string. And so we're able to display that just like it was a regular URL on a server downloading the PDF file. So that's JSPDF and the auto table library. And it's really cool how easily auto table makes it to create this table with headers, with color formatting, alternate colors on the rows here. If you look at the code, none of that stuff is defined. That is the default auto table, and it looks that good on its own without doing anything other than giving it the list of headers, the rows for the body, and then I told it what line to start at. The rest of that's automatic, but if you want to pass in some extra values to control the colors and the formatting, you can do all that. But it's really cool how easy it is to use and how great it looks out of the box. So that's number 2. This one's really cool. Next, we're going to check out ShowCode. This is a web service for creating code screenshots. I'm going to pull this up real quick. So this is an open source tool that I found recently. I was comparing a bunch of these code screenshot tools, and this is the only one I could find that had an API and a free tier. And this was just kind of a fun project I wanted to try, so it wasn't something that I wanted to sign up for a subscription just to test it out. But this one lets you control pretty much everything about it. All of the settings can be adjusted here in the UI. And then if you want, you can export these settings and use that in an API call. Really cool feature. And actually, that was one that I recommended. I requested that feature, and Steve, the maintainer of this project, was awesome about it, and he added that to the API. So when it was first there, the API, it was there, but you had to build that JSON config from scratch. And I had already made it look how I wanted in the UI. So just shout out to Steve. Thank you for adding that feature. It made this really easy to set up and then transfer. So I've taken those settings. I got it looking how I wanted, and I'm using that config. This actually does a bunch of other stuff before we get to that, though. So one of the reasons I picked this one, it has multiple data sources. It's integrating with OpenAI API and base row. There's async JavaScript, file manipulation, lots of cool advanced stuff going on. So what does it do? Well, you send this prompt to the OpenAI API, to an assistant, and it's going to generate some sample data to be used in those screenshots. It's not generating the screenshot itself. It's just giving me back some text that I can send to that API. And so that goes off to an OpenAI assistant that's been given a prompt kind of explaining this whole thing, that I want to create multiple screenshots. And so it's supposed to give me some sample data and then 3 or 4 examples that use that exact same set of data. So now that I have the raw data, I can send that off to the ShowCode API, and this is going to generate an image for each one of these rows. And as you can see, it's just going right down the list, taking this function or this JSON, sending it off to this API saying that I want a code screenshot of JSON or of JavaScript or whatever language. And then it'll generate all this for you. And I've got it set up to allow me to tweak these a little bit. These all look pretty good, actually. But you can see the margin here is a little smaller than the others. So if I wanted to make this image just a little wider here, then I can update a single image. And so I've kind of set up both formats for editing. I can either do a single one or the whole set in bulk. And then you can see that margin just shrunk down a little bit there. So once I get everything how I want it, then I can just give this set a name and save all of the images in one shot. I'm saving them back to base row. And so give this just a second to update. Looks like it is still going. There's the row right there, test set, and the full set of images. And so it's doing that in a single API call, uploading all of the images and creating a new row and a name. And so this is an awesome way to be able to create these in bulk and then go down the list, maybe do multiple sets, and then I can stage those for a social post or for a tutorial or whatever you need. So pretty cool demo. Real quick, we'll check it out in the editor before we go on to the next one. So when the page first loads, before you do anything, it's actually creating a thread in OpenAI. This one is set to run on page load, and it gets back a thread ID. And so if I look at the response, we have a thread ID right here, which gets used in multiple other API calls. And then you click this add message button, and so it's going to add the message, run the thread, and then run this JS object function here to check for results. So back to the APIs here, add a message to that thread. Here's the thread ID and the URL. And then the body is coming from that input, whatever's typed there on the UI in input 1. Once that message has been added, then it's going to run the thread. And again, the URL has the thread ID up here. And then lastly, after running the thread, I have to get the messages, but only after it's done responding. So this one, it's not just once that it gets chained on the same way the first two happen in order. This third one, I have to keep checking over and over. And so if you go back to the JS object here, I have this function to check all the messages. Let's see. Okay, last one here, async check run. So this just sets an interval. And then it keeps running the get run query until there's data. So it looks to see the role of whoever responded last and then what the response is from that role. If the last person to respond was the assistant and there is a response, then it's going to go ahead and parse it and clear out that interval. Now, when you first run the get run API, if you just added a message and then you run get run, it's going to come back and show your message as the last message. It's not done responding. There's no new response from the AI yet. So that's why it's running on a loop. And that is the first part of this whole flow where I'm generating the raw text. Then get all images. That is running the get all images function here. So we'll go back to the JS and you can see that this one is looping over the data in the table. So it's doing a loop using the length of the table in each row, defines the row as the index from that table. So just grabbing each row and passing it to the request image function. So that function is set up to call the API, pass in that row, and define the title and the code for each one in the language. Once I have that, then I'm taking those values and putting it in this array of this object of images rather. So each image in this object, it has a key that says this is the title, and then the property is the image data itself. Then once that's stored in an object by key value pairs, I can use the key to access the image. And so if you go to the image column here, I'm just appending that or prepending with the prefix so that it will be displayed as a data URL. And then the second half is the base64 string. And so I'm building a data URL out of just the base64 string that's returned from the API, and that adds it to the table row. And then lastly, saving all of them to base row. This is running the upload all images function. And so here we have an empty array looping over the table, adding each one, running that upload file for each one in that list, and then adding the image object here is where I'm getting the names of the images. So after it's been uploaded to base row, it'll come back and give you a name for that file. And it's a two-step process. First, you upload a file to base row to just your account. You're not adding it to a certain table yet. And once that gets uploaded, you get back that ID. That ID needs to be put into a certain row. So first you got to upload the file and get its ID. It's a lot like an S3 bucket. and then you got the ID, and that can be saved to the specific row. And I'm actually saving it to an array, pushing it to the array, and then saving the whole row with that full array of images all at once. So looping through file uploads one at a time, and then bulk creating the row all in one shot once I have the array. All right, so that is the third one now. Let's check out what's next. AI chart generator. This one was really cool. So again, this one's using the OpenAI Assistant API. I have a different assistant set up for this use case. And then I'm also linking up to some mock data coming from Makun. This is a API mocking service, and I've set it up to mimic Zendesk ticket. So similar field names and values, and I've got a mock generator here that'll make any number of rows. So I'm going to do 50 tickets here, and this app will generate charts by giving you a function that outputs the config for eCharts. So this is an eChart right here. The AppSmith chart widget can do regular or native charts, or it can use the eChart library. And there are a ton of different eCharts. So you can just scroll through here, find a chart type that looks cool, that's similar to what you want. There's pie charts. I think there's like a nested pie with different rings. So I'm going to give it the name of one of these types of charts and say that I want a nested pie chart, and give it 2 different types of fields to use for each level. So here we're asking for a nested pie chart with status and then the assignee ID. And when I click generate, it's calling that assistant and sending not just this prompt, but also a sample of the data. I'm giving it the schema, the field names, so that it can write a function knowing those field names and the type that I want, and then give me back a function that'll map over the data and create that exact chart type. So I'm going to copy this code that I just got back, and we'll put this into the editor now. If I go to this JS file here, JS object 1, this created the chart that we just saw, like the area chart with lines. I'm going to paste over all of this with the code I just got back, and then we'll check out the UI again. And now we have a pie chart, and it's showing me the types of tickets here in the middle. And then on the outer side, you can see that as far as pending, there's a breakdown where it looks like Ron has the most, then there's blank and me and Kevin here. And so it's doing that breakdown in this pie chart. And if I wanted to reverse the types and put the people on the center, this is set up so that it's conversational. So the assistant remembers the last question and you can adjust it. You don't have to start completely over. So I'll say reverse the data and put the employee in the center. I think it's assignee. And so now I can tell it to regenerate. I'm not asking for a chart type this time. I didn't mention a pie chart or nesting, but because it's conversational and it remembers that history, this actually lets you adjust it on the fly, so you're not stuck with that first response. You can tweak it, tell it what to change, and then we will put this back in our JS object here. And check out the UI, and now we have a chart where the users are in the middle, and on the outside it shows the tickets. So this one is really cool, super powerful, probably one of the coolest things I've done in AppSmith period. Definitely with AI integrations, it's up there. So one of my favorite ones, and that is number 4. So let's check out the last one now. All right, last up, we've got this Markdown editor. It looks pretty simple, but there was a lot to wire together here and figure out. So we do support Markdown in AppSmith for displaying text. If you have some input Markdown saved in a database or back from an API, you can display it as rich text. It'll look like this. What we don't have is a Markdown editor to let you write in Markdown and then save that back somewhere. So I built this Markdown editor, but I wanted something beyond just an input and output. I added the full preview or full editor mode or split screen. But the really cool thing, this took a while to figure out, this supports code blocks. So if I start a code block and tell it the language, And then I can write a function and you'll see as soon as I close this code block, it's adding the syntax highlighting, the colors. It knows the language from this first line of the markdown, and it's going to add different syntax highlighting based on the language. So let's take a look at how this works in the editor. Now, just like the other ones, you'll see that I've got nothing going on the query or the JS side. This one is fully done in the custom widget. So we'll select the custom widget here, and I'm passing in a markdown string for the initial value, just so there's something in there to display. This could easily be coming from a database or a selected row of a table or whatever you want to use. So we'll go to edit the source, and let's check out the HTML first. There's a little bit going on here. I had to import several libraries. So I'm using the Marked.js library for Markdown. I'm using Prism for the code highlighting, which involves importing the JS file as well as CSS. And then I'm using Vue with the composition API to build the UI on the client side, so there's no build step. Then we've got a div for the app itself and another one here for the toolbar. A couple different divs for the different containers here, and the mode that I'm in, and just a way to show and hide. So the view mode here, if I'm not in editor, don't show this section. If I'm not in preview, then don't show this section. And then if I'm in the mode for full screen, it'll show both, or for split screen. Sorry. So that is the HTML side. A little bit of CSS, not too much. So most of it's here in the JS side. And again, here I'm defining marked, the create app, ref, and watch for view. And then we have the AppSmith on ready function, and that's it. Everything's inside the AppSmith on ready. I'm creating an app and then mounting it to that ID of app. So then inside of here in the setup, this is where I pull the data from the markdown that's being sent in to the AppSmith model, define a couple other variables here that we want to make reactive, and then just render the markdown. And so the compiled markdown, this gets sent to first to marked so that it can turn it into the display here of markdown. And then I run prism highlight all. And this just goes over the page and finds all of those code blocks and highlights them. And as long as the code block has that 3 ticks and then telling you what format it is, then prism highlight all will just find all those and highlight it. You can also highlight individual divs and tell it exactly what formatting to use and only get those. But if you just want to do the whole page, and if you've given them all the right format, then it's pretty easy. It'll just do them all at once. So then I've got a function to toggle the view mode and to save the markdown and get it outside of the custom widget. And that's it. There's not much else on the code side. It's fairly straightforward once all the right libraries are imported. So it was a little tricky kind of figuring out the different components and which library to use and, getting it all wired together. But then on top of that, it's just some basic view and a couple lines of code to render the markdown and then highlight it. So this one was really fun to build, and Markdown is so common in GitHub and blogs. You can use it to send a formatted message to Slack using a webhook or Discord. So tons of cool uses for this one. Couldn't leave it out, even though there's nothing too technical, and this one's not AI, but it was pretty cool to build and a lot of cool use cases. All right, that concludes our top 5 workshops from 2024. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Now, about that announcement. Today is actually going to be the last Friday Tech workshop in this series, at least in this format. We're going to take a break. I've been doing this every week for a full year. So we're going to reset, work on some new content, and we're going to change up the format a little bit. It's not going to be weekly anymore, but we will have some new content coming out regularly. So hit that subscribe button to stay updated on the latest content and community events from AppSmith. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you soon.